Hello and welcome to Starship Sofa's HQ. Today we're going to look at Alfred Bester Part 2. This is the conclusion of the life of Alfred Bester. I hope you will stick around and enjoy the show. Yes, so we're back on with Alfred Bester Part 2 of the man, the kind of mystery, the man who I think bridged that gap, like I said the last time, bridged the gap from the old to the new science fiction. And again, look at the state of these notes. I've been carrying these notes around, all going to bed with them, reading them, sleeping them, just to kind of think, and trying to get in the mind of Alfred Bester and trying to kind of put over the best I can of kind of what I've discovered about Alfred Bester. And we left off where he just completed The Demolished Man. This is with Horace Gold from Galaxy magazine. And, this book came out and Bester, in his own words, which is actually quite nice, he says all he was doing was a kind of a craftsman-like job to get it complete. But it came out and it was stunning, to be quite honest. Do you know what I mean? This kind of Demolished Man. Bester said he wanted to call it Demolition. And it was Horace Gold that kind of said, no, we'll call it The Demolished Man. And I've heard rumours as well when I've kind of been looking into other shows, Highline says that Horace Gold was always kind of picking at people's kind of manuscripts and drafts, and changing them. Now, I never found out anything about if that was the case with Alfred Bester or not. You know what I mean? He didn't I don't think he kind of interfered too much with Bester's work, but certainly he chose the name, Horace Gold chose the name, The Demolished Man. And like I say, it came out and Bester in his own kind of kind, sweet way just says, Galaxy readers liked it. Do you know what I mean? Galaxy readers loved it. The first ever Hugo Award that kind of came out, one of them things there, the first ever one, it won, Demolished Man won the Hugo Award. This thing was a kind of massive, wow, look at what's kind of happening. Look at what we can kind of achieve in the writing now in this genre. And, he says, fans were coming up to him and saying things like, I didn't realise, you could write so well about women. And he didn't, he said, I didn't know, again, I was just trying to do this kind of craftsman-like job. And he says it's from there that, he's a science fiction writer, you know what I mean? And kind of people are kind of being aware of him now. Everyone's kind of talking about this kind of Alfred Bester. He gets invited to the Hydra Club. Now, the Hydra Club is like a kind of, a little exclusive club for like science fiction writers. You've got in there the likes of Sturgeon, James Blish, Judy Merrill. They're all in there, you know what I mean? He's been accepted as a kind of science fiction writer, just on this kind of one novel that everyone's talking about. And he says this club, this Hydra Club, is just, it's his words, full of lunatics. This is, there was one day where Judy Merrill was nearly coming to blows with Lester Del Rey about the design of a robot. Do you know what I mean? He says it's just a kind of bizarre concept, all these kind of great minds in together in this club. And he says out of the whole club, there was two there that he kind of admired the most, James Blish and Sturgeon. And he says, I think James Blish was like an ad copy agent, and he would have dinner in Central Park. He would kind of have like an hour off and he would go for walks around Central Park with Bester. And Bester says James Blish was a very kind of businessman-like orientated kind of, views on world and everything like that. But Bester says he just wished his writing, and I think he says, would have more vigor, just give it a bit more oomph. And that's the one thing he kind of wished with Blish. He said he was just an amazing writer, but he works, I think he best to describe his work is he writes with like hysteria on his side. You know what I mean? You just got like, this crazy madness to get it out. And he didn't recognise that in Blish's work, and he wanted them to kind of have that. That's what he wanted. But he says, out of all of them, Sturgeon was the writer everyone admired. You know what I mean? The guy was writing some kind of quality work there. And he says they would go for drinks with Sturgeon. And he says about Sturgeon was, a lovely fellow, but he says he had kind of one, Achilles heel, one kind of fault that kind of dragged Sturgeon down. And he just kind of thrived on crisis. He says his whole world kind of just evolved around this crisis. You know what I mean? It's just, if it wasn't this crisis, it was that crisis. And even Bester said if there wasn't a crisis there, Sturgeon would invent one. Do you know what I mean? Just to kind of live in this kind of this almost continual crisis mode to kind of his work out. And he says he thinks he probably could have achieved much more. Do you know, if this wasn't, you know, and what a waste of a kind of a talent, just kind of to perpetually live in this kind of angst, you know, motion. If not, you know, Sturgeon might, I mean, Sturgeon was massive anyways, but you know what I mean? Bester's always thought, what a waste that was, you know. So the book comes out, Demolish Man, and like I say, puts Bester on the map. So now he's got to kind of come up with a second story, a second novel, do you know what I mean? And this is kind of a crucial part in kind of Bester's life. He says he's got some money sent in from a contemporary novel that he kind of, you know, this kind of, the earnings came in from that. And now he's like, you know, he's made that kind of mark in the science fiction. Him and his wife decided to kind of take a holiday. And they come over to England, and this is where hopefully he's going to write, you know, the kind of Star's My Destination. And he says that was, you can't remember what the working title was. It's always just been for him, The Star's My Destination. He's in this lovely little sweet cottage in Surrey in England, and he puts it down to kind of why all these characters, you know, a lot of these characters in that, you know, have got English sounding names, because it was, you know, when he tried to kind of write this novel in Surrey. And he says for 3 months he just couldn't do it. Do you know what I mean? He was just like wading through treacle. Do you know what I mean? It was just kind of plodding 1 foot. He didn't have this kind of hysteria, this kind of, that would kind of drive him on. It was just not happening. And Bester says it was just kind of an awful time, because he couldn't get, you know, he didn't know what was wrong with him. He couldn't get, you know, this kind of mojo going. They decided to move to London. And he says it's at this, you know, the kind of London address that he scraps the whole of what he'd worked on 3 months in Surrey, starts again. And yet still, he's having trouble with this novel. Do you know what I mean? This one is kind of fighting all the way to get out. And he says, you know, and I think once you kind of start with that, you know, once you kind of get these troubles, the slightest thing just piles on, and you're kind of inventing ones that kind of stop you in the end. And he says he couldn't get like an American keyboard. You know, he couldn't find the right keys. You could only find kind of British keyboards with a kind, well, we'll rephrase that. You could only find British keyboards with the correct keys. Do you know what I mean? He couldn't find an American one. And that was a kind of a hindrance for him. And he says as well, he says it was freezing cold. Do you know what I mean? He just couldn't get the kind of, the coldness just kind of sapped his energy. And I think just things were just kind of one thing after the other were kind of toiling on him. They decided to pack up and move to Rome. And yet still, you know, they get to Rome, and he says actually Rome, you know, for a writer is no good. It's just too noisy, too kind of hustly bustle. If you want to be a writer, don't go to Rome. Those were his words. And yet 3 times he kind of tries, and he kind of wipes the slate and tries to get this novel out. Eventually, the novel is complete. You know, the kind of everything's set and the novel is complete. And this is, I think, one of those, you know, kind of last time I spoke about Bester, you know, and this is why I'm kind of doing it. It's like the kind of these pivotal kind of moments in kind of science fiction history, you know what I mean? And I'm no kind of, you know, historian, and I'm just a kind of fan. But I think this is the moment, one of these kind of crucial moments where things changed. And Star's My Destination comes out, and then for 25 years, Bester doesn't write another novel. And I think that's startling, do you know what I mean? Kind of 2 massive novels, and yet he doesn't write another novel. I think there might have been kind of the stories, odd stories coming out. But it's crucially, he doesn't do another novel.
It was around this time that an event took place which will answer a question often asked me. Why did I drop science fiction after my first 2 novels? A month before I left the States, my agent called me in to meet a distinguished gentleman, senior editor of Holiday magazine, who was in search of a feature on television. He told me that he'd tried 2 professional magazine writers without success, and as a last resort wanted to try me on the basis of the novel I'd written about business. An exciting new writing life began for me. I was no longer isolated in my workshop. I was getting out and interviewing stimulating people in interesting professions. Reality had become so colourful for me that I no longer needed a therapy of science fiction. And since the magazine imposed no constraints on me, outside of the practical requirements of professional magazine technique, I no longer needed a safety valve.
Well, here's a copy of Rogue magazine from the mid-1960s. Bester was a contributing editor. He had a column called Bester's World. He was a successful holiday magazine writer, a sophisticate, a world traveler. He basically didn't need science fiction for that period, and I don't think he was ever that closely connected to the community in the first place.
And the job sounds amazing. Do you know what I mean? He's flying all over the world, interviewing people, writing about certain areas in the world, and it's just too good to be true. And he said the reason why is he'd kind of lost, with this kind of job offer, he'd lost the urgency, the need to kind of constantly try and make a living. Do you know what I mean? It was the kind of ultimate cushy job. And he says science fiction was a safety valve. That's how he kind of looked at it. It was his safety valve to kind of stop him kind of crashing and burning and having no money, you know what I mean, destitute. Science fiction was that kind of valve there. It kind of kept him there, in the family. Along comes, and can you blame the guy? Along comes Holiday Magazine with this big offer. And for 25 years, do you know what I mean, life's on a plate handed to him, do you know what I mean? All the kind of nice jobs, the warmth, the relaxation, everything that's gone with it, it's there. He doesn't need to write science fiction. And that, I think, is kind of possibly one of the worst things that can happen in the genre, is Alfred Bester is pulling away from it. And like I say, 25 years is a long time to get there. But, these things kind of come to an end. Everything, all that glitters. Holiday Magazine, 25 years later, goes bust, or kind of goes out of business. And all of a sudden, Bester's there again. And he says he's back at his workshop trying to make a living. Do you know what I mean? But possibly, time's gone by, things march on, the world's changed. But he says he's got this safety valve. He's got to kind of make money, do you know what I mean, to kind of survive. There's a great quote from Isaac Asimov, talking about Bester, and I'll read it here. He says, "Alfie, we broke new trails on our time, but we have to face fact. We're over the hill." Do you know what I mean? And like I say, a lot of waters went under the bridge for 25 years. He has he gets nominated for a Hugo novel, a one called Computer Connections. And, still, science fiction writers are saying, how good this guy is. Harry Harrison says, "Alfred Bester was one of a handful of writers who invented modern science fiction." And, they're still coming, but for me personally, if he'd only stuck, do you know what I mean, at it, you know what I mean, that's just been a selfish thing, do you know what I mean? I just want him to kind of turn out these stories, Demolish Man, Stars My Destination. Over in the UK it was called Tiger Tiger, but just to have them, sure he did like a handful of stories, do you know what I mean? But I think it had gone, do you know what I mean? Kind of the mojo had gone, the years had gone, do you know what I mean? He started to lose his eyesight there. He was kind of, certainly like 25 years had passed in his life, just things had, had left. Like say Asimov, they're over the hill there now. Shortly before Alfred Bester's death, Science Fiction Writers of America named Bester its 9th Grand Master and presented posthumously in 1988. And the Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame inducted him in 2001. And, I think everyone recognises kind of Bester as kind of one of the one of the crucial figures in science fiction. But my only kind of thoughts are, yeah, massive books, do you know what I mean? Just fantastic. But what did we lose for him, to go to the Holiday Magazine and to have that kind of lifestyle, which you can't blame him. But what did we lose as a genre, as like an industry, as a kind of science fiction as a whole? What novels would he have wrote? Do you know what I mean? Just think, like, if you look at Asimov's work, the amount of body of work he did, Bester might have been able to do, or just even half of Asimov's work. You know what I mean? That would have done for me. What could he have done if he hadn't kind of packed it? That's, and that, like I say, Stars My Destination comes out and he packs it in. Do you know what I mean? And it's just like, for someone who kind of loves science fiction, and like I say, it's a great moment in time, but it's a time that kind of you think, if only. Do you know what I mean? Just if only. So, like I say, that is Alfred Bester, 2 parts on the kind of the man himself. Later on down the line, we'll have a look at some of the kind of the works, you know, like say Demolished Man and Stars My Destination, a couple of the short stories. We'll look there. But I kind of wanted to just get, you know, how Bester means, or what Bester means to me. Do you know what I mean? A crucial figure in science fiction, and yet, you know, gives it all up. Do you know what I mean? And kind of the safety valve, doesn't need it with science fiction and moves on. And I think it's just one of the kind of biggest shames in science fiction, you know what I mean, history. The kind of Bester steps away from it. But, you know, we've got them 2 novels and a handful of others, do you know what I mean? So we kind of, we're lucky, do you know what I mean? So I hope you enjoyed it. Come back next week, you know what I mean? There's more stuff on the go. Like I say, we'll be all over, you know, Sturgeon, you know, Blish, any writers, just stories, individual stories looking at, and just having like a nice time as well. I like to say, I hope you enjoyed it. Do subscribe. That would be fantastic. You know what I mean? Spread the word, put on your websites, tell everyone about the show if you like it. That would be fantastic. Until next time, I would just like to say good night from me.